Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, and you're watching TechStrong TV. It's great at the start of a new week here. It's Monday. It's June 22nd. Thanks for joining us. I hope your weekend was great. If you're in a place where the COVID numbers are down and you're able to get out and enjoy things a bit, great. If you're in a place where the COVID numbers are going up, I hope you are taking precautions. But you know, an interesting phrase I've been hearing lately is, you know, we were using the term socially distancing, that you had to socially distance yourself with the COVID thing to prevent you from spreading of the virus. And I think the real term is physically distancing, right? Because socially, you still need to socially interact with people, whether it is in person from a safe distance, physical distance of 6 feet, wearing a mask, hopefully, or whether it's online or on a phone or however you're communicating. Humans are social creatures, and we need the social interaction. I think that's one of the things that gets people a little bit jumpy from the shelter-in-place stuff, is the social interaction with other people. So I'm not going to ask if you were socially distancing. I hope you weren't, but I do hope you were physically distancing, if that's the case. Anyway, enough about that. You know, we are heading into the summer months here. It is June 22nd. Solstice was yesterday, so yesterday was the longest day of the year, and now we will start seeing it slowly but surely marching towards fall and winter. But first we have a whole summer to enjoy, and I hope we will all enjoy it. We've got a good show today. We've got some great guests. I'm going to start things off with an interview I did with Galen Emery of Chef, and Galen is one of the key people behind the security program there at Chef. And we're going to talk about something called the non-human pipeline, putting automated security in place. After Galen, we'll be back with really my keynote sort of interview for the day, my spotlight interview. And that is with Anand Oswal. Anand is the SVP GM for cloud security over at Palo Alto Networks. And Anand is going to talk to us about 3 different recent announcements and initiatives Palo Alto has going on. One around the next version of the next-gen firewall that does machine learning and takes it just to a level that we haven't seen before. Anand is going to do a great job of talking to you about that. Secondly, he's also going to talk to you about how they've been able to take some of this technology and some of their existing technology and again around an ML AI-powered firewall in containerized environments, which is also pretty cool. And Anand also has some other announcements that Palo Alto made, and we're going to talk about it, so don't miss that one. And then from our archives today, we're going back to TechStrong Con from a few weeks ago, and one of my favorite people, Damon Edwards. Of course, Damon's founder of Rundeck. He's also been instrumental in the DevOps movement. And Damon did a good presentation at TechStrong Con called Business Continuity for Humans, keeping the business running when your people are unavailable. Timely, and as always, Damon always does a good job with all of his presentations. I think you'll like this one, and we'll be playing that today. Then after Damon, I'll be back with the news. Then, as usual, after the news, we'll turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. And Charlene's guest today is none other than Tracy Miranda. Tracy, of course, is the CD Foundation board chair. CDF, as it's known, is really sister organization to CNCF, and really making some great strides recently. Tracy will talk to us about that. She's also, of course, Tracy is also with CloudBees. And then after Charlene, we'll head things over to Mitchell Ashley at the Analyst Corner. Mitchell, of course, from Accelerated Strategies Group, will be giving us his commentary. And then I think we'll wrap things up. That should be enough for a heck of a day. So we've got an exciting Monday in store for you. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we're going to be right back. Don't go anywhere because we've got some good stuff coming.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
My first guest today comes to us from Chef, and it's Galen Emery. Galen is a key person in the Chef security team there. And Galen's going to talk to us today about something, as I said earlier, called the non-human pipeline. It's about automating security, shifting left, the whole DevSecOps thing. Galen is going to tell you about it much better than I can. So let's now go to my interview with Galen Emery of Chef.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Our next interview here on TechStrong TV features Galen Emery of Chef. And, of course, Chef is a company that needs no introduction to our DevOps.com audience. But, hey, Galen, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks, Al. I'm glad to be here, man.
I'm glad to have you here. So, Galen, as I mentioned, I think most of us are familiar with Chef. Obviously, DevOps.com's been around almost 7 years now, or 6.5 years. But Chef is certainly, the Chef that we knew 6, 7, 8 years ago is different than the Chef today. And the Chef today is so much more, right? It's not just configuration management, but security is a huge piece of this. The whole CI/CD process and software development lifecycle is intricately, bound up into what Chef does. But why don't we start off, though, with about who Galen is, though, not who Chef is. Would you want to share with our audience a little bit of your background?
Yeah. So, hey, folks, I'm Galen Emery. I'm the lead compliance and security architect for Chef. I've been with Chef for about 6 years now. I focus primarily on our security side of the house at the moment, but I came out of our federal space. I was our federal architect for a number of years. That's where I built a bunch of the security background. And before that, I was in Windows operations in particular. Always felt that automation was the right way to solve the problem. And as we continue to find other pieces that are hard, that's how I've just kind of gravitated towards the federal space. Those are hard problems. Doing the same things, but without the access of the internet. Then followed it pretty cleanly into the security side of the house as well.
Listening to you talk, I'm reminded, Galen, my background's security. I spent about 15 years in the InfoSec space, as we called it then. And one of it, when you say without the internet, so at one point we were doing vulnerability management for the Department of Interior. And they had just had their internet pulled because they were such a sieve that their security was so bad that a judge actually said, no, you can't even do email until you get your act together. And so they call us in to do, vulnerability assessments and all of that stuff. And some of their, especially out in Arizona on near Grand Canyon, they were operating schools for like Children of Navajo Nation and other first people. And those schools never had internet. They were it was line of sight kind of internet, And so when you had to do patches and everything, you had to send a CD or a DVD over to patch. Same thing with some of the DoD installations. They wouldn't let you. They weren't connected to the public internet, but for some gateway, far away.
I remember the first time I did a briefing in an air-gapped room, there was a single network drop in the entire building, right? If you plugged your computer into that, you had internet. Otherwise, there was nothing.
Nothing.
You were bringing your cell phone in there. Everything else stayed in the car. It's a real thing, right? And it's interesting to deal with that and experience that, and then to also experience, your big tech out on the West Coast. Or what's what's a firewall between our customers, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've been to Fort Meade. Yeah, all interesting stuff. But you know what? You and I will sit and talk about this, and our whole interview goes away, Galen. Let's focus in. We were going to talk about, was it the human pipeline? Is that the right term?
The human-free pipeline is the way we started talking about it, or the human-free zone within a pipeline.
Okay, what is it?
Yeah, the basic structure is that trying to focus on DevOps or DevSecOps from the security mindset, what are the benefits we get out of automation and CI/CD that we can use for security's sake, right? One of the things that we talk about a lot that we can really get clean on is the idea of the human-free zone, or getting humans out of production, right? What I really want to do is I want to make the automation the source of truth for the state of the system, right? I'm not talking about just an individual node. I'm talking about all the things that are necessary, right? So standing up your VPCs, standing up all that kind of stuff as well. And if we do this right, what we can do is we can establish chain of custody on all changes that happen through the pipeline, which means we can force all the access control back to source code management, back to Git. If we combine that with hardening our systems such that we don't have SSH, Telnet, RDP, we can then also help to prove that humans don't have access to production. So if we put this all together, what we end up with a situation is production is built through automation. The automation can be tracked all the way back to source code. I can interrogate any part of the system for authenticity and integrity. And as a result, I can really change the way I focus on audits in production, right? No longer am I sitting there looking at, okay, how do I validate all of production? Well, I know how to validate production. I can look at the state of it. I can look at how it was built. I know all that information already. And so that's the basic structure of what we're trying to get across to our customers.
Excellent. And you have chops in security. We've already talked about that. I mentioned it briefly about how, Chef today is not the chef it was 10 years ago. And security is one of the big reasons why, both through acquisition as well as kind of organic growth within the company. I mean, Chef's security chops, if you will, let alone products, services, offerings, are, best in class kind of stuff, right? I mean, it's
absolutely, yeah. So
it's a huge focus.
Yeah, years ago we acquired InSpec through another company, VolcanoSec, and so we acquired some talent as part of that process as well. And really, what we were finding is we acquired it because it was a good synergy with what we were already doing, right? When we're talking about hardening systems and securing systems, well, operations teams have been having to do that for decades, and we've been helping them solve that problem. And really, what we're seeing in the last 2 years or so in Chef is that we're taking that knowledge of how to solve that problem and applying it to how security teams are approaching the problem on the other side, right? They're not going to make the change, but they want to see the state of the system. They want to understand it in a way that's better than what they have before.
Yeah. I've had a few conversations recently with mostly security vendors, to be fair, right? Who are, doing the DevSecOps thing. And they're very focused on making the security tools, I don't want to use the word dumbing them down. That's not the word I'm looking for. But making the security tools more understandable, right? More holistic to developers. And in doing, and that's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't do that. But in doing so, you got to remember that the security guys need access and insight and visibility to the security going on over here in the left, right? We talk about shift left. Great, we shifted left, but these guys still need to be able to see what's going on here to do their jobs as well.
Yeah, and I'd say in particular what we're seeing is that when we talk about DevSecOps, right, oftentimes we see people just say, okay, let's take the product of security and stick it left, stick it early in the pipeline. And nobody's ever sitting down and saying, security team, what do you need to operate in an agile fashion, right? You've got these waterfall methodologies coming from your baselines, right? CIS and STIG are updated, months or years at a time. And so how do we help you iterate in a faster approach? How do we help you be part of the pipeline process with both your work and also with our work as a DevOps team?
Yeah. And to get to this whole, non-human pipeline kind of thing is what's going on in that pipeline more and more is automated, whether we're talking about testing, deployment, iterations and all of that is, and security people are at such a premium. There's just not enough to go around, right? automate. It's almost like a dumbbell, both things wearing you down. We're going to automate more and not have enough security people, but yet we want the security people to have more say in here, more visibility in here. So it's a double negative almost at some level, right?
It really is, right? If we think about the stuff back to lean management, back to the Phoenix project, back to all these kinds of, find and remove the bottleneck, right? We know that the bottleneck is security review. This is not a new thing to anybody in any enterprise.
No.
So the question is always, well, how do we fix it? And in many cases, the answer is just like, well, let's just put it earlier in the process. And there's some, again, like the earlier and better you can run those tests, better off, right? But fundamentally, we have to automate that structure. If we're going to try to automate the deployment of our applications, we can't have a person coming through the application stack, combing through the system manually, reviewing it for security settings. And further, the things we're looking for are 9 times out of 10 just dumb, simple things, right? Is telnet not installed? Is the permissions correct on the sudoers file? Are password minimum complexity turned on, right? Like these are not hard things to check on a system individually, but they become a problem when we're trying to check them 10, 20 times a day across 10,000 systems, across 100,000 systems. All of those just exacerbate that scale problem that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And again, my time in InfoSec, right? So the company I was a co-founder of was called Still Secure, and we were one of the early folks in something called NAC, Network Access Control. Our product was Safe Access. NMCI, that Navy Marine Corps Internet at the time, was a customer back then. And this was, well, I don't want to say, it was a big network, okay? Big network, a lot of nodes. And that's exactly the kind of stuff we would check, though, right? We go into registry, look at was SSH turned on or Telnet or were things up to date? Was a patch applied? What ports are open? Pseudo vulnerability stuff, but also just like what apps are enabled or not, whether it be on a server or an endpoint, anything that was going to access the network. Back then it was on 802.1x.1x, right? And we could virtually check anything. You just write a check for it, a test for it. And what was great is, and what made it so attractive to that network I mentioned was, at that size, at that many, literally hundreds of thousands of nodes, to be able to do that every time a node came on or off the network, join the network again, and then on a periodic basis, without a human, right? The human only had to get, because even when it found something bad, it could put you into a quarantine state, or some kind of restrict your access and alert someone. So humans didn't have to get involved until something popped up and then you could set policies on whether you even wanted to let someone know this or not, right? Or just take the device out.
Yeah, and these are the things that you can totally do, right? And things that we've demoed and talked about before. I've also demoed a while back that when a system failed an inspect control, I just black holed it in Amazon, and then my auto-scaling group says, hey, that node's no longer available, give me a new one, right? And we can get
that's immutable infrastructure, right? Boom, spin up another.
Exactly.
We didn't have that in 1988. I'm sorry, man. Or excuse me, 1998.
Yeah, but exactly it. We can make decisions based on trust and integrity, right? I can say, hey, look, if my system doesn't follow the security rules anymore, and it did, maybe I don't trust it anymore, and I can make a different risk decision that I could have otherwise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's great to have that ability. But that ability can't be in a vacuum.
Right.
And that's another great thing about the whole chef world today, right? That the whole inspect security thing, whether you're working in Habitat or part of this greater environment, it's part of it. It's not that bolted on. When I was doing it, it was a bolted on piece at the end of the train, right? Yep. Now it really is built into the fabric, if you will.
Well, and exactly it, right? You mentioned the idea of immutable infrastructure. Everything Chef builds is designed to be immutable, right? We create an artifact that is either your configuration management, your application policy, or your security policy, and we deploy that artifact to however you need to deploy it, right? And this is what enables all the things that containerization does and all these pieces. And that's what you need to be able to have that kind of quick reaction, quick risk management to say, nope, that thing's no longer trusted, kill it, build me a whole new one.
Agreed. Hey, man, we got a little bit of time left, and I feel obligated to have to ask you that. So we're all locked in with COVID and everything here for 3 months. How's that affecting? What are you guys seeing in terms of people building? We're hearing stories of, security taking shortcuts, or people taking shortcuts regarding security to make remote access work and stuff like that. What are you guys seeing from your perch?
Yeah, so obviously Honda just this last week or two had a big breach that initial reports look like it's related to the remote work pieces. Obviously, remote work became a necessity for most enterprises, and so there's a lot of heartache over that. We've seen a lot of people start to adopt zero trust and beyond corp type stuff on their desktop management to try to really focus on that problem. So on the positive side, we're seeing that. It's obviously it's a scary world for all of us. I'm involved in a kind of a counter the CTI League, which is a group of people trying to help solve disinformation and cybersecurity threats against healthcare, specifically around COVID. So that's a good group of cybersecurity. But what we see is that the attackers don't take a break, right? They're like, cool, game on. Like I'm already working from home.
Man.
Yep.
Right.
And then we organizationally have to make some really big changes. I think the remote work thing is obviously the most pressing security concern for everybody, because your attack surface just multiplied by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. And most of our customers, at least, are not vocally clearly taking backdoors or otherwise kind of opening up their world. They're trying to be reasoned with it. They're working through a lot of things. We've seen a lot of VDI infrastructure show up as a result of it, right? Particularly for shift work and support desk and things like that. Rather than putting all of that threat at the edge, you just say, hey, look, you're going to VPN to this thing. This is the box you're going to get to, and go from there. So we've seen a couple different approaches to it, but yeah, it's a big risk, right? And I think, if I'm honest, I think the technical side is important and challenging, but I'm really curious to see culturally what happens as we get out of this, right? Which companies adapt to a remote first culture, and which ones go back to I want to be in the office, I want to have control over my people.
So we speak to a lot of companies here. I do 4 or 5 interviews like this a day, Galen. Vendors, end users, all kinds, and then podcasts and other stuff. I don't know many companies who think that they're going to snap a finger and go back to February 1st or something like that. I think the changes here are going to be long lasting, if not permanent. I think part of it, though, and you may see this happening too, is we built this whole security infrastructure for when people aren't in the office of, and it goes back to the old castle and moat kind of, way of thinking. Well, we're going to give them a VPN back into the office, because theoretically that's where my assets that they had to access were. And so they're going to VPN in here and get that. But what really is happening is that people are VPNing back into an office only to be piped back out to some SaaS application on Amazon or Azure or Google or, in the cloud somewhere. And, and this theoretically is hardened as well, though not necessarily. And when you think about it, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. This has to go. And right, people can't do that on the fly, but I think we're starting to now see companies who say, wait a second, we got to make this simpler, we got to make it more direct, we got to make it more secure. And so this piece of it has to go, and that direct piece. And I think that's going to be it's going to be a whole cycle of technology change, retraining, right? So direct to cloud access, especially in large enterprises that didn't do that before.
Well, and I think you're right. And I think that one of the key things is that the VPN and that methodology is based upon, I must secure the human, right? You,
Yeah.
Alan, are the thing that I'm securing. And when we're talking about automation, well, A, your credentials are the thing that matter most, not you yourself, right? And B, if the automation is in charge of the actual deployment process and I can prove that Alan himself cannot make a change to production outside of the automation, then why do I care where Alan comes from, right? I have
Exactly.
plenty of guards beyond it to go check for. I can leave the drawbridge down and you can walk into the main courtyard. It's fine because you can't get to the tower, right? You can't continue on from there.
And there may be nothing in the tower,
Totally,
right?
right?
The
Yeah.
tower's empty now.
Yeah. One of the ones that I want to build, I haven't had a chance to do, is that I mentioned I can quarantine off a system, but I'd love to see somebody build that into an instant honeypot, right? The
Right.
moment you think an attacker is in your systems, you drop your production data, you move it somewhere else, and then you just let them run free in what they think is production, and then you can watch them and do what you want to do.
So I saw that in action in SecDef years and years ago, maybe 2007, 6, where they would purposely allow, like they purposely have weak spots that someone could try to and think they were infiltrating, and then they would just watch where they went, knowing that there's only where they can go,
Yep.
but they wanted to see what they would do to see kind of the mind of the intruder. One of the things I learned, and you probably learned this too, working in the Fed space and cybersecurity, is no matter what we hear in the public here, there's a lot of really smart cyber dudes who work for the federal government, and both offensively and defensively, right? And they game's on. They got their game on.
I think my favorite example that they've been able to talk about, or at least has been announced publicly, is Stuxnet. Is probably one of the most fascinating pieces of software to ever kind of hit the market, in terms of its scope, how effective it was, how many 0 days it used, how they figured out how to cross the air gap of not just themselves but also the target was was Iran. And so there's some really good stuff out there.
Absolutely. I mean, and think about it. Stuxnet has to be 10 years old now, right?
Yeah.
Think about how good it is, what they have now. Anyway, Galen, I told you when we started, the 20 minutes goes like this. We're over.
Absolutely.
I got to pull the plug on this one, but maybe we can have you back on. We could talk more about this. I love it. In the meantime, go ahead.
I'd love to be back on. It's a great time.
All right. Keep doing what you're doing as chef. It's important.
Yep. Thanks, Alan. Have a good one.
All right. Hey, Galen Emery here from Chef here on TechStrong TV. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
My guest right now is Anand Oswald of Palo Alto. He's SVP GM, Palo Alto Networks. First of all, I always say you can't buy passion, and Anand is someone who brings a lot of passion to his role at Palo Alto, passion for security, cloud security, and just, passion and sharing with people. I think it's going to come across loud and clear in this interview. Three major areas of announcement and information on Palo Alto. Let's now go to my interview with Anand Oswald, SVP Palo Alto.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment for TechStrong TV. My guest right now is Anand Oswald from Palo Alto Networks. Anand, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Alan, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Anand. You know what, let's do things right. Anand, would you mind sharing with our audience what do you do at Palo Alto?
Absolutely, Alan. So my name is Anand Oswal. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Manager at Palo Alto Networks. I run the network security business for Palo Alto.
And that's a big part of the business of Palo Alto.
Yes.
Absolutely. And COVID or not, security marches on, and unfortunately, the bad guys don't take any days off. They're relentless, like the virus is at some point, but at some level. But Anand, Palo Alto had three kind of what I consider three pretty big announcements, news coming out recently, and I'd like to go over them with you, if you don't mind. I'm going to let you kind of set the table on the three pieces, and we'll dive into each of them.
So, Alan, let me just give you a little bit of context before we get started. If you see the state of the network security industry, as you said, the attackers never take a day off. The adversaries are now getting, in many ways, smarter. They're using machines to do their job as well. So we're seeing this malware, these phishing attacks using machines. They are constantly morphing and using automation themselves. That's one big thing that's happening. The second big trend that you see is, and this has been going on for a while now, IoT is getting more and more used in every single enterprise. Healthcare, manufacturing, retail, you name it, right? Now what happens is that IoT devices are generally made from a plethora of different manufacturers, right? Different OS systems and stacks and software functionality. You can run agents. It's difficult sometimes to manage these endpoint devices. And many a times, these devices come into the enterprise and IT has no clue that someone got them. So not everything is IT managed. So they're unmanaged and managed devices. And this can cause a problem. Many of these devices typically will have unfettered access to the network. 98% of the IoT devices will send unencrypted data. So we need to make sure that we are understanding what's on the network and how do you prevent it and how do you activate it with ease. The third trend that I see really happening is that the attack surface area has increased tremendously when you think of security. We now have, with the advent of applications moving to the cloud, your branches are now directly accessing the internet. You have, all of us are now working from home. So now we are bringing the office in the house. Mm-hmm. And the third trend that I talked about earlier was that as you have all these IoT devices in the enterprise, they can access things. And so your attack surface area has increased. If you look at these three big trends that I talked about, the traditional approach of using manual or signature-based approaches will not work, Alan, right? It's going to be really bad. So what we announced yesterday was three things. The first, the world's first machine learning powered next generation firewall. Now, we've always had machine learning being used in our products, but we typically we use them in the cloud. We push these things onto the firewall device, etc. As attackers are now morphing their malware, we're bringing machine learning to the core inside the firewall. So for 95% of the malware and phishing attacks, I can now detect them in real time on the firewall itself.
Really?
Now,
great.
One of the big trends that we've always measured for the last 7 to 8 years is that how fast I can push signatures. When I find a malware, I send it to the cloud, I do some processing, analysis, static, dynamic, and I push signatures down to the device. And 24 hours, even today, is considered industry's best practice. At Palo Alto Networks, we've already made that before this announcement up to 5 minutes. But Alan, the trends I talked about with attackers and adversaries, 5 minutes is also not enough. We need this to be real time. And that's the second innovation that we've brought into our machine learning powered next generation firewall, where we're now able to have real time updates for these signatures.
Let me ask a couple questions, if you don't mind, Anand. I get all this, and I 100% agree with you. To me, there's always this discussion of what's the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? ML, AI. and they're different, right? In my mind, machine learning is just that. The machine, whether that machine's in the cloud or on the edge or where have you, the machine learns from recognizing patterns. It's pattern, at some level, it's pattern recognition. It's from recognizing patterns, it recognizes these things and can either suggest or maybe proactively take action based upon the patterns that it's seeing. And this is just me. This may not be the official definition. Artificial intelligence, there's sort of a synthesis, if you will, where it recognizes these patterns, and it may recognize multiple patterns, and then synthesizes that information to recognize something that may be new, that may not be exactly the pattern that it just saw, but is based upon the patterns that it's learned. It could recognize it as something potentially malicious, let's say. And so when we look at that, that's ML to AI to me. Then when we talk about the brain, if you will, of the machine learning being here in the cloud and pushing it down, from what I'm hearing you say, we're no longer sort of pushing it down. That machine learning is taking place right in the core, on the machine itself, not at the brain up in the Skynet or whatever.
So we're doing both. For 95% of the attacks, I want to be able to detect the variations of the known malware on the box itself.
Right there.
For the 5% of the new malware that I need to now send to the cloud for processing, typically what our peers in the industry take 24 hours to do, we're now going to do in real time, in 5 seconds. So even for those 5% of the cases, I'm going to be able to push the update in 5 seconds. That's what I talk. It's both.
And at that speed, humans aren't involved,
no.
Right? That's got to be automation at the machine level.
Absolutely, Alan, you got it right. Absolutely, it has to be fully automated through machines.
And that to me that's the next gen in the next gen, if you will, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're moving to the place where, not that we're not smart enough as humans, we can't operate at that sort of velocity.
Yeah, and the scale is tremendous. Then, as you've seen over the last so many years, I think the network has grown. Everything that we do on the network is critical. 15 years ago, if your network went down, it was a problem. But now, your business can stop completely.
Understood. And, just to emphasize that point as well, you mentioned IoT, and I know you have some news around IoT that we're going to share. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't remember off the top of my head, how many IoT devices do you estimate there are connected to the internet today? I know it's in the billions.
Yeah. You have different reports talking of different number of IoT devices online, right? You have some reports which say that every single hour, 1 million new devices come onto the internet. Now, but many of them are also coming into the home and consumer environments and some of the enterprise. Mm-hmm. There are reports which say that between 30 to 60% of the devices in your enterprise are IoT devices. And most of the times, enterprises don't even know that they're online in the enterprise. Okay, and that's a problem. The second problem, that's a problem of visibility. The second issue is that I talked about is that IoT devices have, if you think of the traditional approaches you had, I want to protect different types of devices on the network. There's laptops, these phones. I know what types of devices are there, right? If IoT devices, they come from from different manufacturers and many thousands of them, different OS stacks. They usually have low, very limited security posture on the devices. You can run agents on those devices. You typically don't manage the life cycle of the software on those devices. You don't patch them. You don't know when they were end of life. You don't know what vulnerabilities they had. So these are the problems that exist in the industry. Now, from our perspective, what we want to do is that 3 things. First is that we want all enterprises to know what devices are on your network.
Visibility.
Visibility, right? Absolutely. And now you can't know visibility by having a list of known devices, a list of known asset types, and then matching. That approach of signature based is going to not work, because I'm having billions, like you said, of different variations of devices coming online. I just won't able to keep up. That's again the power of machine learning. Right? We need to be able to detect devices on the network that have never been seen before. Okay.
Agree. If you don't mind, this was brought home to me. I had a discussion a month or so ago with another vendor that when each one of these IoT devices, Anand, is an identity. And from the network's point of view, Anand, you're an identity. You're a person, but you're an identity. You have an ID. Each IoT device is an identity. It's an ID. Each instance, whether it's a Kubernetes instance or a container or whatever, an instance on a server, and then each server is an identity. From the network's point of view, whether you're a person, this is an IoT, and this is a Kube, a K8, makes no difference. It's three identities. So how do the job, if you want to accept it, right, the challenge, you got to need visibility into all these identities, but beyond just pure visibility, what do we do with them? How do we manage them from a security point of view now?
Let me get to that one. Before I get to that one, let me also explain the first part on visibility that you talked about. Even just that is not enough. It's not enough for me to tell you that this is an IoT device, manufacturer X manufacturer X, and it's a laptop, a smartphone, a camera, or so and so forth. I want to be able to tell you what is the behavior of that device, because I could now masquerade that device to act like something else.
Yeah.
So it's important to have visibility, but it's important to also know the behavior of that identity. So I'm Anand Oswal. I am in this location. Like, what's my behavior? What's my role? What am I trying to do? So that's important from a visibility perspective as well.
Yes, it is.
Now, come to your question on visibility is good, but what next, right? The important part is you need to have policy remediation. I want to be able to set policies again dynamically to say, like, if I'm a camera, why am I talking to the printer or the point of sale terminal, right? I want to set those policies dynamically to get to that point, and that's where you have all the automated policy remediation for IoT devices. And then you can apply all the power of the Palo Alto network security that we bring from a threat prevention and all those capabilities that we have into the IoT landscape.
Perfect.
Okay? The third point that's also important in this is, look, it needs to be very, very easy to activate and onboard. Like, it can be complicated. Put these devices, have these sensors in my network, put these sensors in every single branch office. Then I will learn. After 2 weeks, I'll tell you what's there. That doesn't work. It needs to be real time. It needs to be simplified to activate and onboard. And that's what we do with our solution. Easily to activate. If you're already a Palo Alto Networks customer, it's a subscription. On top of that, you get it, cloud native, you're done. If you're not a Palo Alto Networks customer, the existing firewall can act like a sensor for you, and you can get visibility, you can get remediation, and you can get ease of activation. And that's very key for us. Okay.
So I've been in security a long time, Anand, 15, 20 years. And I remember when Palo Alto came out with the first next gen firewall, and the idea was that it was application aware. It wasn't just port that we're shutting down that port or this port, or IP address based. But this is a whole different world now we're talking, right? I mean, we think back to what was next gen 3 gens ago to what's next gen that you're referring to here. It's not just about the application. It really goes to just every single device, instance, whatever you want to call it, identity on the network, and being able to deal with those in real time, right? In real time, from a behavioral point of view, recognizing what's normal, what's not normal, what's suspect. At some level, look, transfer yourself back to 2005, and if I told you I had this capability, you would think we were either crazy, lying, or witches, right? But here we are talking about being able to do that today.
I mean, the world has changed so much
Yeah.
Right? If you go back to the past, networks were so simple. All networks did was connected a few hosts to a machine, a server, a data center. Then
Yeah.
we said, okay, we're going to have people now work remotely from the house. So we had VPN technologies, hub and spoke, etc. Then we said, okay, the job of IT was to make sure if I VPN, how do I make sure the right person can get access to the right resources? And then we said, okay, you know what? Now I have mobile devices. I can bring your own devices to the enterprise. And it got more and more complex in some sense, right? And then you say, you know what? Your applications are now dispersed. They're no longer sitting in the data center. So now you don't have a single place where the applications are. They're in the data center, they're in the cloud, in multiple clouds and SaaS. And now, now with the advent of things like SD-WAN, right? We say that now from the branches, I can directly access those applications. Now, so you got to think of security a completely different way. And then you have IoT coming into the enterprise. And that's like, increasing in terms of what it can do. So this all requires a different way of approaching. The scale is different. The network topologies have changed. What users want has changed. The expectations of you have changed. For example, I'm at my home right now, but I want the same application experience of all the applications that I get in the enterprise the same way. I can't expect poor performance of some application just because I'm home right now. My expectations have changed. So all this data, this scale, this complexity and expectations has led to we got to think about it differently. But what will not get us there, and that's why we said that look, we need a different approach. We need an approach which is like bringing machine learning to the core, real-time updates, solve this prevention inline, and also get real-time updates. Have detection of newer things which are growing in the enterprise at a massive scale, right? IoT, and the third part I'll tell you is something that is very, very important is around how do you get policy remediation for security? Typically, in many cases, this has been done manual or semi-automated. Now we have so much data coming from the various devices, enhanced application logs from the firewall, user information, device information. We want to make sure that all this information and data that we have, we can use machines, like you said earlier, to give me automated policy recommendations so I can improve the security posture dynamically. I can't wait to do it manually. It's not going to work.
No. The one thing, the lesson from a lot of this is that very little can be done manually in real time anymore. Yep. And without automation, right, you can't keep up with the speed of business today. It just moves. The scale and the speed is beyond it. Anand, we're going to run out of time, and I want to make sure we hit everything, though.
Let me talk about the last part then, the container series, because I know that you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's something that's near and dear to me.
Look, container adoption is on a serious rise. You know that. You've talked about it in your show before. I heard you talk about it. We're releasing the containerized version of our machine learning powered next generation firewall, designed specifically for Kubernetes environments. It's a significant development, Alan. According to Gartner and other people, we've seen it. In the next 3 years, the vast majority of organizations will be running multiple containerized applications in production. And you heard about our Unit 42, which is our threat research arm at Palo Alto. And we've done some tests, deployed containerized versions in fully secured cloud environments in the traditional cloud providers. And within a half an hour to 45 minutes, we've been able to compromise that, which tells you that we got to be really thoughtful in how we deploy this containerized in containers. And if you look at our story from Palo Alto, it's really 4 key pillars. And we have announced the layer 7 inspection and threat protection, the full layer 7 network security, threat protection capabilities delivered by that machine learning powered next generation firewall. But there are other aspects of ensuring that your container environments are secure. And that's what we've done through other acquisitions in the past, which is not part of this launch, but just to give you the big picture, like we need to have vulnerability management. So you need to understand that you can manage your risks in runtime, implement container image scanning. Then you need to have runtime security, which is protecting your running containers and the host OS by building a baseline of that application behavior. And then you can set kind of alerts to know what's anomalous. Then you need to have identity-based microsegmentation to say who can talk to whom. And finally, you also need that layer 7 inspection and threat protection, which the containerized firewall that we announced yesterday will give you. All this has to work in combination. This is going to be a very, very interesting space, like you've talked about in the past, and we're just making sure that we are giving our customers the full suite of solutions.
So two things. First of all, is this going to be part of the Prisma product line?
So this is basically a form factor of the firewall. So you have the machine learning firewall, a hardware version,
and now a containerized one.
We have a containerized version, and we have cloud delivered, which is Prisma Access.
That's Prisma Access. So, I think back to when we first started seeing like hypervisor-based, VM-based infrastructure taking over. So that's probably 2003, 2004 in that time frame. And for a long time, there was a discrepancy in the kind of security that was available in non-VM environment versus what you were able to do in that VM environment. And it took a relatively long time for it to equalize. The good news is I think here in containerized environments, we're recognizing that, number one, containerized environments do present unique security challenges. But number two, we're not seeing a long drag time, a long lag from this kind of stuff like this machine learning firewall that we were talking about all day today. It's also now being available in a containerized environment, so that there's not a second-class citizen at the container level, and so I think it's important, and
it's important
and
when
that's
you're
great.
running in a Kubernetes environment. You have these namespace boundaries and these trust boundaries, so you can decide what your trust boundary is, right?
Yep.
And you can run this.
Anyway, Anand, I told you 20 minutes. We blew past that a while ago. I apologize. Let's have you back on, though, because I'd love to jump more back into machine learning and IoT. And really, the mission has changed. That's really what we're talking about here. The mission in security has changed from that moat and castle of defense to now. It's a different mission.
Look, the network has changed. The adversaries have changed. The environment has changed.
So why should the solutions?
More and more running critical infrastructure right now. So, you need a different approach.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alan. Wonderful talking to you.
All right. Anand Oswald, Palo Alto Networks, here on TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed our interview with Anand Oswald from Palo Alto Networks. Now it's time in the show for something old. Well, it's not too old. Going to TechStrong Con from a couple weeks ago. And our friend Damon Edwards, CTO, co-founder, Rundeck. Damon presented on business continuity for humans, keeping the business running when your people are unavailable. I think you're going to find it, as usual, a great Damon Edwards interview. So here now is Damon Edwards from TechStrong Con.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So I have to admit that when Alan and the TechStrong team asked me to speak on business continuity, I was a little bit reluctant to do so, only because business continuity often it evokes feelings of doom and gloom and may not make for the happiest conference presentation. But I think you'll find my message is one of hope and positivity. For you see in studying high performing operations organizations, I found that those that are rethinking their approach to business continuity, they're applying the same techniques, the DevOps, the Agile, the Lean techniques that we've been applying throughout the rest of the organization to improve outcomes, improve people's work lives. The same lessons are being now transferred over to the idea of a business continuity. So it's good for everybody. So without any further ado, let's get started. This is business continuity for humans, keeping your business running when your people are unavailable. Okay, so let's start with some ancient history. Life before February 2020. If you can put yourself back into that mindset, right? And what I want to ask is, when you hear these words, right? Business continuity, resiliency, disaster recovery. Back at that time, what really came to mind? What was the first thoughts that popped into your head? And I think if you're like most people, it's really about the physical things, the assets, what we use to run our business, right? Our data, our applications, our infrastructure, the buildings, our networks, our telecommunications, the physical assets that could possibly be under attack, and that we need to protect and recover from, and the kinds of things we thought about, right? We thought about snowstorms, right? A nor'easter is going to bury our headquarters, and how do we bring the people into our headquarters and let have cots so they can sleep in the conference room, or maybe get a block of rooms at the hotel across the street to make sure that people can help to work around the clock. And earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, right, might just damage our infrastructure or destroy our data center. Cyber attacks or bad actors might try to steal or corrupt or otherwise destroy our data that's key to our business. So the kind of legacy conversations and a lot of the focus around business continuity was around the assets, the data, the applications, the infrastructure, things we need to run our business. How do we protect those and recover from damage to those things? And what was the role of the people there, right? Our people were there we bring them in to fix those things, right? So they're the heroes that we are at the ready to apply to figure out, well, all right, how do we recover? How do we bring the physical assets that we need to run our business back online and back restored? So, but now let's talk about the new world, right? March 2020, we learned a valuable lesson that what happens when our people are disrupted, right? The assets, the physical things, the infrastructure, the data, the applications, those are all fine. But it's the people that were disrupted. Anything from just a new work from home situation, totally just changed the communication pattern and the way we work. No longer could we lean over to our colleagues and talk across cubes, or we know to IM our colleague in the other building who sits near the DBAs to go ask them a question. Also to where people became unavailable, whether they're had to take care of family members or they became ill. A lot of things changed at that time, and we suddenly realized, well, what happens when our people are the ones who are disrupted, and because of that disruption, that's when the bad things start happening to our business. So, also I think if we think back to a lot of people's conversations around business continuity, they always tended to drive towards some type of silver bullet, right? Like, oh, well, let's add redundancy. Let's have a plan and a backup to the plan. And it's going to be all about adding redundancy and to our critical systems, and that's how we're going to achieve the business continuity that we need. But the reality is, also in this new world, something else has happened. The complexity of our systems, the complexity of our infrastructure, the complexity of our data has skyrocketed. So now to the point where when someone says we're going to add redundancy, the question quickly comes up: well, where? How is that possibly going to work? And the first point there is think about that our world has gone complex, right? That Gone are the days where we had a server rack, it had our application in it. We could think about the data calls between all the different pieces of the application, keep a lot of that in our heads, or try to keep a lot of that in our heads, and get by. Now, if you see, the push towards the microservices architectures, what this has really kind of done to our world is things have really turned complex, right? This is one of these Death Star diagrams that become quite popular. It's looking at the network traffic between various microservices. All that gray text around the outside is our microservices. This is like a medium-sized B2C, I think, well-known company with their microservices architecture that Cornell wrote some software to do this visualization. Other people have done it as well. So on the outside is all the microservices. Inside is the traffic between those different microservices. So immediately, the complexity here has kind of gone through the roof. And it's more than just complicated. It really is complex. J. Paul Reed, who's now at Netflix, is one of the people that really kind of first brought me into this notion of complexity and adaptive capacity. And his main point is that, hey, when we're in the software side of the world, right, the development side of the house, we can think in very deterministic terms, right? So you'll have your software, either the source code, right, either compiles or it doesn't, either it runs or it doesn't. It's easy to kind of think of that things are going to be deterministic. But as soon as you get into operations, those components combine with other components, combine with user behavior and network traffic and hardware variability and all the various things that can go on. It becomes this complex system that you can't really ever determine what exactly is going to happen. You can't decompose it into and examine the parts and then reassemble it together and think you understand how it's all gonna work. So our world has quickly left the deterministic station, and we're now into full-on complexity, where the best we could do was help to strive to understand the system, strive to continue to bring it under control, but we'll never quite get there. And if you want to some academic rigor behind, well, why is this why is this, and how do complex systems fail? Richard Cook, who's a famous researcher, he's also an MD, he's an anesthesiologist. So he has that career, and he also has his other career, which is one of the foremost experts in the world on high consequence systems, operating rooms, airplanes, nuclear power plants, places where disaster has real consequence. He's one of the foremost experts in the world, and he wrote this seminal paper that I highly suggest everybody reads, which it's going to give you a blueprint for all the ways that your complex systems are going to fail. And I think if you're in operations these days, you're going to kind of recognize and nod your head at almost every one of them. And remember, it's written by somebody who isn't coming from the operations space, so it's very enlightening. And to top it off here, Charity Majors from Honeycomb, she has a great quote here, which is, distributed systems have an infinite list of almost impossible failure scenarios. And this is a very interesting thing to consider when it comes to disaster recovery. And you'll hear folks from Netflix, from LinkedIn, Facebook, places where they've had to study complex systems. They've realized that the more they've invested in resiliency, doesn't mean they get less problems. It just means they get weirder problems, right? They get stranger errors, they get stranger conditions. And Charity's main point is that when you're working in these complex distributed systems, you get what's an infinite list of almost impossible failure scenarios, meaning that the failures you start to see are failures that if you thought about it ahead of time, you're like, there's no way, that's impossible. That would never happen. In fact, you probably couldn't even think it up. And yet you see time and time again to get these edge cases of one that wow, that silver bullet, or that magic bullet that tore through our infrastructure and never would have thought it would happen and never would happen again, right? So we're living in this very complex world, and we have to keep that in mind when we're approaching business continuity, that the old silver bullet of, oh, we're just going to, focus on our key critical systems and we're going to, make them redundant. It's where, like, how is that possibly going to work in this dealing with this new complexity? And this increasing complexity and scale also drives specialization, right? Where we need people who can go deep in each of these areas. And then for many large enterprises, this is quite a luxury. It's great. They can bring in Kubernetes experts and various data scientists and application experts in various parts of their stack. And as the complexity increases, you need that expertise. You need that specialization to help understand what's going on and fix these systems. And that scale drives further specialization and further siloing of that knowledge. So again, as that specialization increases, how do you provide redundancy for those people? And also the whole idea of what's a critical function, right? I think that's kind of gone out the window. Gone are the days where, we've got an ERP system, or we've got our payroll system, or things like that, to say those are our critical systems. That's our critical functions, and we're just going to look at redundancy and protecting those particular functions. But I think this last couple of months is really showing that what is a critical function, right? In airlines, right? These are all true stories here. You wouldn't think the refund system was the most important system, right? That's not the most important business system, being able to give refunds, but it is. What happens when the eyes of Congress, the eyes of the regulators, the eyes of the world, the business, the press, your loyal customers are on you, and your daily bookings drop to hundreds of thousands of dollars. But your daily refunds spike to tens of millions of dollars, right? Literally the exact flop, from what happened, weeks earlier, right? So, how would you know that refund system was going to be the most important system in the whole company? Another example, from the financial services bank, right? You wouldn't think that launching a microsite and a web form, right? Is that the most important system? Right? That's something for marketing, something for, some edge cases. Having that capability, wasn't something that people thought of as, that is the most critical function in the bank. Yeah, but it is when, what happens when millions of small businesses are counting on it, right? When there's large fees at stake, when, the government is on your case to be able to offer this to keep the economy going. Suddenly, that ability launching this microsite in these web forms becomes the most important system in all of the bank, right? Who would have thought of that weeks before? Likewise, you wouldn't think that work from home capabilities. This is a example of another financial services company. They had offshore centers, and because of the sensitive nature of what they do both development and operations work in these offshore centers. They had forbidden work from home, right? Everything was done on desktops that had very locked down access. They had very physically secure buildings. So how to do work from home capabilities wasn't even on anyone's radar, but it suddenly becomes the most critical function in the company, because 35% of their dev, QA, and operation staff, their total kind of IT engineering capabilities, was locked out of the office with less than 1 day notice, right? Global pandemic, country shuts down in just hours notice. How do you keep going, right? Now you've got a significant portion of your entire organization is locked out, and how do we now roll out those work from home capabilities? Those suddenly are the most important thing to keep the business running. So this idea that we can say, hey, well, we know what these critical functions are, and we can just protect those functions, which really I think it's proven to be false. So what do you need, right? If we can't just say, well, let's just find these few critical systems, apply redundancy, and go for it. It's really this idea of adaptive capacity, right? And this is an idea. I'll read this definition here. Adaptive capacity relates to the capacity of systems, institutions, humans to adjust to potential damage, take advantage of opportunities, and respond to consequences. It's really a property of a system, and you'll see this as it really come from from science, right? Biology, ecology, sociology, a study of societies. You'll see a lot of climate scientists talking about this. safety sciences, as well, looking at, say, that humans are these social, or these that we're, if you apply it to the business side of the house, talking about management and IT, and you think about it as these organizations are these social technical systems. And one of the key properties of the system that we really in the past hadn't explicitly paid attention to is this idea of adaptive capacity. How well as an organization can we adjust to the inputs from the outside world, whether that be in a negative sense, potential damage or actual damage, consequences, or to take advantage of opportunities, right? It kind of cuts both ways. So, I think the big shift here is the thinking is going less away from traditional business continuity and more towards developing this idea of adaptive capacity for both disaster business continuity and normal operations. So, how do you enable adaptive capacity? So I've been kind of looking at organizations that have been succeeding in this area, that are building these dynamic learning organizations who can adapt and adjust. And a lot of them, they're really the proof's been in how they've been able to handle, the recent pandemic and unrests, and how they're able to continue their business and support their people while actually continuing to succeed as a business, right? And there's really these three capabilities that I've seen them striving for and succeeding in building. The first one is decentralized platforms. The second one is decentralized communication, and the third one is decentralized knowledge. Right? I'm going to kind of go through each of these for you. So the first one, decentralized platforms. So really the idea, the search for decentralized platforms. This idea that how can we enable people to work in a decoupled fashion? How can we let business units, teams have the infrastructure, have the capabilities that they need to get their work done and move at the pace, to be able to not be kind of tied to a larger monolith, cross team monolith, but really work in an autonomous fashion and be able to drive their part of the system or their systems forward. So this search for these platforms, right? These abstractions to which I can say, hey, the platform will handle a lot of the capabilities for me, and I can focus on the things that really matter. We've kind of gone down some different paths, right? I think once upon a time, if you can kind of go back in your mind, there was the PaaS, right? The idea there, we're going to take some code, we're going to throw it at this platform, and it's going to work, and it's going to be great. I think that's kind of a dead end in the decentralized platforms, just because the usage became a bit too limited, right? The idea was better than the execution. And then there was, hey, what about virtual machines, right? It's if it's too limiting just to worry about throwing a certain type of code and the structured code at the platform, well, maybe it's the VM, right? Maybe the VM is going to be the thing that we're going to be the interface to these decentralized platforms. You can ship an entire operating system, right? Well, we found out quickly that while there was a lot of success on the just general operation side, that it was nice to have virtual machines rather than all physical machines. There was also VMware, I think did a great job selling, server consolidation. Why have, a bunch of servers at 10% capacity when you can consolidate them all down into one by having, multiple virtual machines on that machine. But in terms of kind of search for a decentralized platform, really didn't pan out, the same way. But I think it did. Its intellectual successor was the cloud, right? The infrastructure as a service. EC2 first was EC2 and Amazon, and then we've kind of grown to all the other cloud services from there: Azure, Google, Oracle, and so on. And but what happened then is we have these kind of low-level building blocks, right? We got the virtual machines, we've got the database, we've got the messaging services, we've got the firewalls, we've got the DNS, all the things you need, but there are these kind of low-level primitives, these low-level building blocks. So, great advance, but it wasn't really giving us that decentralized platform that we want. That was too low-level and too fine-grained. And then containers came along, which it gave us a lot of the speed that we were missing in the virtual machine world. It also let us kind of ship ship a unit of without having to build things from scratch, like in the infrastructure as a service paradigm. So containers are great, but we were missing a lot of the platform capabilities around those containers. It came in really to manage them at scale. And that's really kind of led us down this cloud native path. And I think we've seen the rise of Kubernetes and all the technologies around that are really driving us towards, well, hey, cloud native, is that going to give us this decentralized platform? And I think we're seeing a lot of hope and a lot of promise there, and I think that's going to continue. But I think what's really kicked it into overdrive is what's come out of the DevOps field, right? We're looking at, okay, well, how do we operate these systems? How do we bring the dev and the ops side of the house together to move quicker and have faster feedback loops? And I think when you marry that up to what's gone on the cloud native side, we've seen the rise of things like SRE, right? How do we operate our systems with that software development discipline, and expert operations and platform engineering, right? Which is I think a helpful name for us. But the idea that, hey, how can we split operations into these two groups? One's building the platforms, the other is helping the business units run the platform. So I think a lot of great progress has been made there, and I think we're actually getting to the point where we have the decentralized platforms that we need to move forward. And yes, I know I drew some red lines here, but please, these are all, don't at me, right? These are all still very successful technologies, and all of them are in use today. I'm purely talking about the search we've been on, right? How we've looked high and low for decentralized platforms that can achieve our goals. So the next thing I want to talk about is decentralized communication, right? So if we have the decentralized platform, right? If we have where we can individual teams can adapt and evolve the platforms and the infrastructure that they need, how do we let folks communicate, right? If we have rigid and hierarchical communication structures, we're going to build rigid and hierarchical systems, and we aren't going to be able to adapt as an organization. So what's been going on there, right? First and foremost, let's go back a ways, right? So, for the last 100 years, we had the telephone, right? And I'm sure it took a while in the business realm to figure out, how do we use this thing? But generally, it's following, a very rigid structure, right? I got a directory. I know who to call. I'll call the receptionist. I'll ask for a certain department. I'll get transferred to a secretary in that department, and then from that they leave a message, and eventually that I'll get a call back at some point. So this was the way that people worked for decades, right? And it was very much kind of a rigid way, even though you could call anybody. Still, if you think about how it was used, it was still a very a rigid system, and you had to know who you're calling, and you had to know the tricks and how to make it how to make it all work. And this kind of last 20 years or so, we've been also playing in the world of email, right? Where this has been a great rise in point-to-point communication, where we don't have the gatekeepers, right? We can email anybody, but it took us a long time to come up with what's the right way to do this? What are the rules of the road? How do you use it? And you also still have to know a lot about the organization, right? Discoverability is still an issue. You got to know who to email and why and what the right alias is or the right group. It was a step forward, but still, it was tied in kind of the old rigid, hierarchical organizations. And now, what's come up? Well, it's really the era of chat, right? And really, for the last 5 years, actually a lot of organizations, it's been a lot less. But it's the idea that we have this new colorful and rich medium for communicating, right? We've got direct message chat, we've got channels and groups and teams that we can, that we can chat with. But like email, like the phone before that, there's things we have to figure out, right? We got to figure out, well, what are the channel usage rules, right? How am I supposed to use this? What's the expectations? What are the SLAs, right? What can I put into what channel? What's the expected turnaround time of that? What's the right behavior and rules of the road? And then also just structure and discoverability, right? How is this this thing structured, right? And how do I find the teams that I need, and the people that I need to find and know who does what and where to do things. And it's very interesting. I think the organizations I've talked to that have kind of really haven't missed a beat in this new world that we're living in these past few months. They leaned heavily, and they had put the time in advance. They built almost like you want to consider like an API for the organization in their chat system to lay down the rules of the road, to lay down discoverability, the structure, to understand how it all needs to flow together. It's not good enough just to turn it on and say, here you go, you got chat, go for it. If that happens, they're just basically recreating the same hierarchical kind of rigid. You have to know who in order to make it work. Versus the organizations that have gone and invested in these in this improvement. So I think a lot of things going on there that are quite remarkable, and expect to see a lot of investment in companies in figuring out how to better use these tools. So it takes me along to the next, the kind of key leg that you need in enabling adaptive capacity. And this is something I know a lot about, through Rundeck, and a lot of folks in our community have really taught us a lot about this. But it's the idea of decentralized knowledge, right? So if you think about it, in this kind of complex world that we live in, I mentioned how the knowledge resides in these specialist silos, and things move so fast and are so complex that transferring knowledge becomes very difficult, right? And so because of that, we've got these experts, these subject matter experts, and the knowledge of how to do things all kind of relies with those silos. And over really the past, I guess, decade or so, you've seen a plethora of tools, right, have arisen that are really about helping cope with with these complicated and complex systems that we're dealing with. And in a lot of ways, it's almost become a sprawl of tools, right? How many ticket systems, how many different ask somebody what's their what scripting languages or automation do they use in their organization? Well, they'll tell you the most latest one, right? But then start walking backwards. Say, well, what'd you use before that and before that? And you'll find out that, they love Ansible, they love Python, or Chef, or whatever it might be, but they also have Ansible, Chef, Python, Puppet, a whole lot of Bash scripts, a whole lot of PowerShell scripts. They got one of everything, right? So we've got this sprawl of tools that the experts have built to help them cope. But the reality is, we still need those subject matter experts to operate those systems, right? They have to know, how do you invoke these tools? What data do you put into them? What versions do you use, right? What's the setup you have to do? With the expert interfaces in those systems. What buttons do you push? What order, right? Which option values do you give? Is it -E or is it -I? All these things require expertise. You have to know how to invoke and what to invoke at the right time to make things happen. So, how do we take that knowledge and make it reusable by others? And that's really this missing piece here, because if those people, experts, aren't available. Now, this could be they're unavailable because of, they're no longer with the company. It could be because they're taking care of a sick family member, or it could be just because they're busy. The CIO has come down with some, very important, thing they have to work on, and they're basically going to shut everything off and be MIA. So, how do you cope with this, right? What do you do when that knowledge is still in these silos and it's not reachable? Because of that, you have these long turnaround times. You have longer instances that you need. You have a lot more things waiting in queues. So what has to happen? Well, this is where runbook automation comes in, right? So runbook automation is the idea that how do we capture and share that expert knowledge as automated runbooks, right? So runbook in general would be the idea that, well, what are the steps I need to do here, right? How would I need to interact with all these different tools? In what order? And what steps? What do I need to know about it? What inputs do I need to provide? What do I need to watch for in the output to know what to do next? That's all traditionally was written down in a runbook. But the reality is that runbooks are as a written document. As I said before, things are moving so fast that knowledge transfer is so difficult to to do. It's like most documentation, it gets stale, it doesn't get fully completed. But if you can capture those as automated workflows, right, and you can build the guardrails in those workflows, such as the user interface, how to handle the user input, error handling, notifications, access control, passing data from one step to another, all that knowledge, capture that as automated workflows. That's the runbook automation. Now, what you can do is you can share that knowledge as an automated runbook with anybody who actually needs to use it. So by doing that, you're able to decentralize that knowledge and build a more adaptive organization, right? So decentralized platforms, decentralized communication, decentralized knowledge. That's the three things that organizations who have become high performing organizations with adaptive capacity. That's what they build. So another lesson kind of that we learned is don't get fixated on the big one, right? A lot of times in disaster recovery, we think about the big problem, right? That the lost data center, the WannaCry style hack that's gonna destroy our data, right? So it's often thought about, well, this is the big problem, right? And it's done once a quarter, once a year. We run through these exercises, and our operation starts to kind of bifurcate, right? Where we've got the everyday operations, how we do things on an everyday basis, and then we've got these other big one scenarios that we're going to work with. Probably some business continuity team that generally is not going to be part of the technology organization, reports the CFO, the COO, and they'll have this kind of sort of thick binder game plans for what happens to one of these scenarios. And so we get that kind of bifurcation where we start to talk about, well, everyday operations, here's how we're going to do things, but now we're going to have this other stuff for disaster operations, and things start to split. And on one side, we've got where things that work great on an everyday basis, we're not using them in that disaster recovery scenario, or that disaster recovery scenario doesn't work because we haven't learned from that everyday operations because we've divided things up. And so, if you look at kind of organizations that have taken this very seriously, Netflix has talked a lot about this, right? And this is something I pulled from their blog, and it's this ethos that if we aren't constantly testing our ability to succeed, right, despite failure, then it's not likely going to work when it matters most, right? So if we aren't constantly testing failure, how do we know that we're going to be able to respond when the next failure arrives? And Netflix, for a while, they talked about this idea of their chaos monkey, right? In fact, they've got all kinds of monkeys. They call it their simian army. And for those who don't know, it's a very interesting idea, which is, what if we inject failure into our environments on purpose, right? And the chaos monkey being their first tool that did this, that just ran all the time and randomly shut down servers, right? And the idea there is that it forces people to build with discipline, to think about failure on a day-to-day basis, and so then when a major failure does happen, that's something that's out of their control, they're ready for it, and they've practiced it, and they've succeeded. So it's really the idea of saying that instead of focusing on business continuity just being the kind of large disaster that happens once in a while, how do we test it on a regular basis? How do we make it part of our day-to-day life, right? And because if you think about it, there's really two types of disruption that happens in an organization. There is that macro, right? There is the big problem, right? It's a shock to the workforce that noticeably impacts the business, right? Natural disasters, regional outage, some type of major cyber event, global pandemics, right? We'll put that in the macro disruption category. But there's also the things on the right here, right? The micro disruptions, and these are the frequent. They're often only locally known, right? So maybe people only know within a certain team or a certain group that this has even happened. But these events accumulate, right? It's undermines a business. It's the business death by 1,000 cuts, right? And these are things like individual illness, family emergencies, a sudden departure, that effectively there are these little kind of micro disruptions where people are unavailable, often goes unnoticed, but it kind of builds and builds in an organization. So how are we going to test this, right? The idea that we want to test these things, test our ability to be an adaptive organization, test our ability to have that business continuity through everyday use, right? The first one, decentralized platforms, pretty obvious, right? Just use them. The things we do, the ability to run fast and to recover from failures and to evolve things on a daily basis. That one's, I think, is pretty obvious how to use that on a daily basis. Likewise with the decentralized communication, right? If we're using those communication patterns on a day-to-day basis, whether everybody's in the office, everybody's out of the office, but that becomes the way that we work. We use those tools, we use the structure and the communication paths and the rules of engagement that we set up in those systems. If that's how we run things on a day-to-day basis, now we communicate on a day-to-day basis. When things go wrong, it won't be much of a blip, right? We can continue on as we have before. The third one here, the decentralized knowledge. This is one that's, I think, a little more involved, but there's a huge benefit to doing this outside of being ready for business continuity in of itself. Also being able to do this on a day-to-day basis really provides a lot of ROI on its own. So kind of want to talk about runbook automation for its everyday use, just for incident management alone, right? That if you think about how incident management often goes today is you have these subject matter experts or the go-to people, somebody who's getting the alerts, the tickets. Often maybe it goes in through to a level 1 or a level 2 team, and they're getting these alerts, they're getting these tickets, they're knowing there's something wrong with a particular piece of the environment, and so what happens next, right? Generally, maybe they're digging through a wiki, right? Maybe asking folks like, hey, have you seen this? Do you know about this problem there? Looking at different procedures that the wiki or the manual run book might tell them to do. They're looking at going, well, when was this written? Who wrote this? What are they trying to say here? Another option might be they've got their own access to their own kind of local tools, right? Access to that different parts of that tool sprawl. But then they're thinking, well, do I have the right version of this script? Do I know how to give the right environment variables? Has anything changed? Do I know how to target this to the right, to the right servers or right pieces of my infrastructure? So, in all of that, what often ends up happening is really a third option, which is let's just escalate, right? So it goes from the level 1 to the level 2. Now we're paging people, and the context wagon grows bigger and bigger as everybody has to jump on board. And what's happening because of that, we have these longer incidents and we have a lot more disruptive escalations that are, preventing people from doing other work in the organization. So, by applying runbook automation to this, day-to-day incident, management scenario, remember, again, we're working in these complex systems, as people have already noted that, you can't stop the failure, but you have to learn how to respond better. By using that same runbook automation that we would set up for, disaster recovery or kind of major continuity scenarios, we can use that at the micro level to diagnose and respond to these incidents. So the things that the experts would do, the things that the people we would escalate to, let's encapsulate those in these automated runbooks. Now anybody who's responding to that incident can try those same things. So what are the 20 things the network folks would tell you to check? What are the things that the database team knows to check the health of the database, or the storage team, or the server team, or the application teams? How do you compile all that as automated runbooks? Now anybody can run them. We're diagnosing incidents quicker. We can avoid those escalations because there's more action that they can take. And if they do have to escalate, they can have more of a pinpoint escalation because they're able to, do a lot of that expert analysis up front, right? So, we see things like, 40, 50, 60% reduction in incident length, right? Based on the type of incident that people are seeing, 50% reduction in escalations. Doing this right not only prepares you for major failure, but it also kind of helps on the day in, day out failures that, add up to make a real impact on your organization. A great example of this is last year at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, some folks from Capital One talked about their runbook as a service project, right? That they blended auto remediation with that rapid human response, right? So in their world, they've said, okay, well, we build these runbooks to diagnose problems, these runbooks to try to resolve problems. and we hook them up to our monitoring tools. And we look at an event. The event decides to, because of that we match with a diagnostic runbook. If the diagnostic runbook sees a known problem, we trigger the rule that runs the manual runs the repair action. And if there's no rule, then we page the on-call, right? And that was what they had the system they had built. So they're blending the auto remediation with the rapid human response. But you notice they're also building effectively an immune system, right? That they're able to spot and respond to failure very quickly. It's really exercising that muscle that can help them on a day-to-day basis. But but they're also building these capabilities for kind of larger incidents as well. Another usage for runbook automation on a day-to-day basis is service requests, right? So just things you need from folks either within your operations team or outside of your operations team, cross organizational boundaries. If you think about it, subject matter experts, somebody always needs something from them, right? They need something provisioned, they need something checked, they need something repaired. There's always some type of request that comes their way. And each time that request happens, you got two wastes really going on. One is waiting, right? It's a slow turnaround time. People are trying to get something done. Now I have to open a ticket. I got to wait for somebody else to respond to that ticket. I probably got to go to a project manager, get them to escalate the ticket. And then finally, when the ticket comes back to me, there's some question about it or something that was misunderstood. So you go to round and around. So waiting happens, even the best case scenario with these types of these tickets, these requests that fly around. And then on the other side of that, the people who field the requests, those are generally your subject matter experts. That's where the interruptions come in, right? We want them to work on things that move the business forward, but instead we're injecting this disruption into their world, which is preventing them from getting to the things that we want them to get to move the business forward, right? So, that same runbook automation we can apply in this scenario to say, hey, well, let's have that subject matter expert set up the those common service request types, set them up as self-service, right? So if somebody needs something provisioned, if somebody needs something, to run a health check or to, fetch some logs or to go run some diagnostics, or to deploy the next version, wherever it might be, they now have that automated self-service via the automated runbooks. That gives them, very fast turnaround time, so they're happy. And it greatly greatly reduces the disruption or the interruptions that would normally kind of fall on our subject matter experts' lap, so they can get to the work that we've hired them to do to move our business forward. So, these three kind of main pillars, I want to keep coming back to them, right? The decentralized platforms, decentralized communication, decentralized knowledge. These are the things that add up to, kind of build that foundation for your organization to really, start to develop its adaptive capacity. But there's a fourth one, right? And this one actually is probably the most important, but that's why I want to kind of bring it up here at last. And that's really becoming a learning organization. So if you've built this, if you have the infrastructure and you have this tooling to, to be more adaptive and more flexible as an organization, you have to teach your people in the organization how to learn. You have to build the capacity of the organization to, study scenarios, figure out what the response would be, and learn from that knowledge and share that knowledge throughout the organization. And so this whole idea of becoming a learning organization, there's a whole, kind of a field that's really dedicated to this. John Allspaw, who actually introduced Richard Cook and I think Paul Reed and other folks in our community to, the idea of the safety sciences and the academic research that's been going on, in other domains. He really does a lot of work in this area. In fact, he calls his company Adaptive Capacity Labs. But it's really about, how do you build an empowered a just culture, from the bottom upwards, right? And by just culture, I mean where the people are supported, where there's safety, there's the ability to learn, to take the time to learn, to the ability to, kind of not have the finger pointing and blame that generally shuts down learning in organizations. And, teaches organizations to say, well, how do we become a learning organization? So I'm not going to bother going into it because I'll probably not do it justice, but you can Google John's name, and you can start pulling on threads and find all sorts of great resources for really the science behind how do you build a learning organization. Because when an organization can learn, that's the key for an organization to adapt. And those that really have kind of built out this capability as a learning organization, they're the ones that are able to really harness those capabilities that I was describing earlier to build that adaptive capacity in their organization to react not only to disaster, which we've been talking about, but also react to market conditions. How do we learn to become better as a business and kind of dominate failure and dominate success. And John's got this great line. I love it. And he basically says that incidents are unplanned investments, right? Something breaks, something goes wrong, you got to fix it, or the business is going out of business. So you're spending the money, right? So whether you like it or not, every time there's an incident, you are making an unplanned investment, right? So if you aren't learning from it, you're losing that ROI, right? So his message is, hey, every time there's an incident, it's an unplanned investment. The ROI is up to you. What are you going to get out of that investment that you're forced into making? And that's really comes down to this ability of an organization to learn. And then once you've learned, what you learn, that's what you can run through your adaptive capacity to deliver the reaction to that learning that you had. So let's recap. Let's go through it. What we covered, right? Number one, right? See beyond the legacy view of business continuity, right? We have to get past the idea that it's about the physical assets and protecting the physical assets of the company and restoring those assets. We have to worry about the people, right? What happens when your people are disrupted? Our people are our number one assets. The knowledge in their heads walks out the door every night and may not come back. So what happens when those people are disrupted, and how do we avoid that disruption, and how do we allow others to participate and reuse that knowledge that would otherwise be in those folks' heads? That's got to be kind of our driving goal of our modern business continuity. And remember that the complexity and the pace of change has really undermined our legacy standards. So our legacy strategies for disaster recovery and business continuity. So I think we need to kind of throw those out the window and restart thinking about things from first principle. And one of those things being that the goal of enabling adaptive capacity, right? The decentralized platforms, decentralized communication, decentralized knowledge. Those are the technical underpinnings, the capabilities that will allow an organization to develop that adaptive capacity. And again, runbook automation is near and dear to my heart, and it's the thing I hear most about from people out in the community. So we talked a lot about that, but really focus on that for both everyday operations and disaster operations. You really can't kind of do one without the other. And the most important capability that you need to build that adaptive capacity is to become a learning organization, right? That is if you can do one thing great, it's the most kind of amorphous and the most difficult to nail down, but it is the most powerful capability that you can build in your organization. If they build the ability to become a learning organization, your organization will know what to do with these other capabilities to build that adaptive capacity. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you really enjoyed it. I'll be over in the chat answering questions after this. If you want to grab the slides, you can go to rundeck.com/TechStrong. They're already posted up there. And anytime you want to talk, I'm at Damon Edwards on Twitter, if that's your thing. If you prefer email, I'm damon@rundeck.com. And that's it. Thanks for listening. Thanks for Alan and the whole TechStrong team for having me, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
I hope you enjoyed Damon Edwards' presentation at TechStrong. Damon just does a nice job with presentations always, and what you saw there was kind of classic Damon. So thank you very much to Damon for doing that. Next up is the news, as usual. Just a kind of perusal of the headlines over across the three main media ops site of Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, Container Journal. And let me jump in with a couple. Over on the Journal, on Container Journal, we have Zerto preps data protection platform for Kubernetes. The whole area around data security, data ops, data is king and paramount, and we're seeing that across all of our sites, whether it be Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, or Container Journal, people are putting forth tools, services to help with data operations, data protection, data security. And this is a good one from Zerto. Check it out. Over on DevOps.com, we have a DevOps chat that I did with the CTO co-founder at Strong DM, and it's easing work from home with Strong DM. And then we also have an article on the EU's plans to build a wall around GDPR protected data. Good luck with that, but check out the article. You'll see what's going on. And then over on Security Boulevard, we have recent cases question backdoor encryption. You know, the whole area of backdoor encryption is one that gets me just a little the back of my throat, kind of. I'm not a fan. Read the article. You can make your own choices and decisions there. And then also up on the Boulevard today, 4 ways to keep company data secure during working from home. So again, it's all about the data, folks. Don't forget that. As usual, guys, that's 6, 7 headlines of articles that are new on our site today. There's probably 50 new articles on Security Boulevard alone today. Bunch more on DevOps.com and the Journal. Go check them out. If you don't want to go check them out, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get a regular update of the top stories across or individually. But, we consider it part of our mission here to keep you up to date. Now, though, it's time to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor. Charlene has 2 great interviews for you today. So let's head over to Charlene. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Tracy Miranda, who is the Director of the Open Source Community at CloudBees and a board chair, the board chair at the CD Continuous Delivery Foundation. Tracy, thanks so much for taking some time and talking with me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hi Charlene, thanks. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, we haven't talked to you guys in a little while, so I'd love to get an update on what's happening with the CD Foundation. Let me know what you guys got going on.
Yeah, no, it's pretty exciting. Back in March, we hit our first anniversary, and I also took on the role of board chair. So it's sort of it feels like we've passed the bootstrapping phase and we're ready to get into full speed. That being said, there's been a few world events that we've had to contend with. So that's been a really interesting challenge. We had a number of in-person events coming up, and actually, like many others, had to cancel them and very quickly pivot to a lot more kind of online and different formats. And yeah, in particular, like many others, switching to virtual events. So we've got our first CDCon coming up in October, but we also have some great programs. We spun up a podcast, which is doing really well. It's called The Pipeline, and just doing more on kind of webinars and excuses to bring our community together, and yes, virtual horse guests included, and just all sorts of fun things.
Wow. Sounds like you guys are still making progress even in light of what's been happening with the world at large. So, and I totally understand about having to pivot quickly and do things. Hence the TechStrong TV broadcast. So, I guess if there was ever an example of pivoting quickly to reach the audience in times of difficulty, what we're all doing these days is definitely a great example. So congratulations on doing that. So how many members do you guys have now?
I believe we're up to 33 members. So yeah, it's going strong. A couple more I'm pretty excited about in the pipeline, though not quite at liberty to share yet. Mm-hmm. But yeah, lots of engagement. We're building out some of the other communities as well. So we have a ambassador program that was launched recently, and we're up to kind of 50 ambassadors. And these are folks from around the world who've sort of said, okay, we buy into CDF's mission and we want to go spread that. We want to run events. We want to talk about it. We want to advocate for the projects. So yeah, no, it's been pretty exciting to see the growth.
That's great. That's great. So, yeah, I know when we're talking about CI and CD in general, continuous integration, continuous delivery, obviously a lot has been done on the CI side, but not so much on the CD side. So, is that the main goal for the CD Foundation, to kind of advance the technology and the practices of continuous delivery, or are you guys kind of moving beyond that into other areas?
Yeah, no, I think this is that's a great question. And it's something we constantly grapple with. So we recently sort of had a bunch of our board members and other community folks come together and work out, what is our mission. And what we sort of came out with is, that the foundations seeks to improve the world's capacity to deliver software with security and speed. And then when we say, okay, how are we going to do that? What we all agreed on is, we're going to focus on maybe three key things. So one is going to be best practices. How do we help people figure out what those should be, especially at a time where, tech paradigms are changing so quickly and people have to grapple with new environments. So that's one side of it. And then so what you touched on, just propelling adoption of continuous delivery tools. It does feel like many people have adopted CI, not as many as we think, so that's certainly a factor, but mostly on just getting companies and organizations to a point where they can push out value to their users, and how to do that in a repeatable way, safely and securely. We want to do what we can, particularly with modern architectures, to support that. And I'd say the third thing is just on the cross-pollination of technologies, and make sure with all the new technologies coming out, we're converging rather than diverging. And I think that's part of adoption. How do we make it easier for folks to do that and not be hit with a hellscape of tools?
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's a big thing. I was actually just going to ask you about that, because we are seeing a convergence of different tools and doing different things to kind of to make it less of a disparate tool chain, if you will. So many different products into fewer products that do more things. What do you think that means for the market in general? Do you think that that's actually a positive sign that we are seeing such convergence, or do you think that maybe it kind of reduces the amount of opportunity for organizations to really have a tool set that works the best for them?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good sign for the industry, like the convergence maybe can reflect some maturity. And I think it also happens when, like, let's say something like pipelines, we have lots of different tools which support pipelines or workflows, but if everybody's reinventing the wheel over and over again and has a tool that does some mostly the same but slightly different, then we're kind of missing out on innovation. And I've seen this in other communities where if you have kind of a more standardized approach or common APIs and everybody agrees on certain building blocks, then you can very quickly move up the stack and you can start finding better ways to do things, maybe ways with continuous delivery to pull in business visibility and other things like that. And I think that's the general direction we need to move in software delivery, of bringing in all the folks, not just dev and ops, but every part of the business.
Interesting stuff. And the CI/CD pipeline obviously is a critical element of DevOps. So it's always fun to hear about what organizations are doing with their pipelines, and because it's, as it's not just about doing DevOps, it's also doing DevSecOps. It's and AI Ops is now coming into the mix, and so many other different kind of ancillary technologies are now being included in the process. So kind of, where do you see the pipeline moving, and where do you see what are the quote unquote hot areas right now that maybe folks should be a little more aware of?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot on we start off at the pipeline and the delivery aspects. There's a lot, I think, education around specific deployments. What kind of deployments should you be choosing and why? How does that map to, whether you've got something legacy or whether you are starting something fresh. And then there's this, I don't know if you've come across the term progressive delivery as well. So that's covers a whole range of more sophisticated techniques. Like how would you roll out to a subset of folks, do some almost experimentation, get some feedback, and then make decisions about, pushing those changes to a wider group. So I think we can do very, very sophisticated things when it comes to delivering software. And then the challenge, of course, is doing that in a way that you're not breaking things, or if you are breaking things, you can roll back quickly. So yeah, just safety and security has to come in.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that's safety, security, but also ease of use, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the user experience as well. So, all right. So you are the director of the open source community at CloudBees also. So I imagine open source is a very large part of your conversations that you have every single day. So where do you see open source in the CD kind of, framework and just the whole aspect?
Yeah, I think it will be core. At my day job with CloudBees, I have the pleasure of working with like the Jenkins community. And I think that's, Jenkins has done so much to get us to where we are today. It was the original tool which helped developers be efficient. And by the very nature of everything being based on open source, but not just that, the fact that you could extend it and make it your own, I think were key components to how things have evolved to this part. So I continue to see open source as just being, central to the core bits that we want to do around developing, whatever tools or whatever frameworks we have. And it's a great way, to bring people together, whether they're companies or individuals. We can collaborate on, the common pieces, and then businesses can differentiate on top of that. So it's a model that works really well, and it helps us to just get on with the innovation, share the bits that are ripe for collaboration, and then just push on innovation in other spaces.
Excellent. Well, Tracy, I really do appreciate your taking the time and giving us an update on what's happening with the CD Foundation. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops, and I'm here now with Curtis Minder, who is the CEO of a company called GroupSense. Hey, Curtis, thank you so much for taking the time and talking with me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charlene.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the black market, especially as it pertains to COVID-19, because I think we all recognize that COVID-19 has pretty much turned the entire world on its head, and so much has actually changed because of it. And honestly, I don't know of anybody who doesn't really want the world to kind of go back to some sort of sense of normalcy. So, the idea of anything that's going to help kind of propel that sense of normalcy, whether it's a cure or a vaccine or something like that to help us kind of get rid of COVID-19, is obviously something that's going to be make people sit up and take notice. But that also means that where there's opportunities, there's
Right.
where there's hope, there is that opportunity for criminals. So, tell me a little bit about, first of all, why don't you tell me a little bit about GroupSense, and then and where you guys kind of play in this whole black market conversation.
Yeah, sure. We're a cyber reconnaissance company. We're effectively focused on solving digital risk issues for corporate companies and governments. We do a lot of work that's very use case driven for those companies. So we have pharmaceutical companies as customers, for example, and we're looking for counterfeit drugs, things like that, in underground markets that pertain to them using internet intelligence tools. Basically, the high level of that is we spend a lot of time spying on bad guys for our clients. We also do things like election security for governments and things like that. So we see a lot of interesting stuff.
Yeah, I can imagine. You guys really have your finger on the pulse of the cyber criminals, the criminal activity in the dark web, and all that good stuff. So, tell me what you guys are seeing in the black market currently as it relates to COVID-19.
Well, like you said, Charlene, never waste a good emergency. The bad guys quickly capitalized on a couple of things. One, obviously, when they saw the injection of trillions of dollars of stimulus money, they went right to work on their fraud schemes and things like that. So we've been tracking a lot of that for the government and turning that data over to them to try to mitigate that fraud. But it's going to be unprecedented, the amount of fraud that occurs around the PPP program and things like that. Related to COVID, we did a research, we were commissioned to do some research on the hydroxychloroquine or HCl drug that was mentioned by Trump, and we assumed right away that these guys were going to capitalize on this as well, and they did. And what we saw was a largely number of scams related to this, where people were claiming to have some version of the drug and selling it for very small amounts, and then more credible sellers who actually had some what we thought were actual surplus of the drug. And in some cases, we were actually able to link those underground actors to actual storefronts in the real world. So they were legitimate pharmaceutical operations that had access to the drug. And so, yeah, they were trying to price gouge, large numbers of dollars per pill kind of thing for the hydroxychloroquine. That went, of course, down a rabbit hole.
Right.
I think the theme that we came away from that study with was maybe for the first time in a while, we're dealing with something where the vaccine or the treatment for something like COVID might actually be the most valuable thing in the world. So if you think about the impact, and so from a cybersecurity perspective, our concern is still today, even though we hear about the breaches all the time, and it's becoming more and more commonplace, and enterprises are becoming more aware of this as a concern, it's largely operated as a cost center. And most of the protections that companies and governments put in place, they put in as a response to a bad action. And if you take that paradigm and you apply it to this, it actually is a little scary, because you think about the types of places that would be targeted to get the data and or vaccines related to COVID, and those are largely higher education and or research labs, which are probably not well protected to begin with. And that's the real concern.
All right. So are they actually targeting the networks of these pharmaceutical companies or I should say higher education institutions and research institutes? Or, I mean, how are they, is it like a basic phishing attack, or, how are they getting in?
Well, so the points of entry are myriad in different kinds of tools and scope, but they're not as difficult typically with higher education institutions, because as sort of a philosophy, those organizations are typically pretty open. And if you think about what enables someone to commit sort of a fraudulent crime or get data they're not supposed to have or get into something they're not supposed to be in, what gives them the credibility is access to information. And guess what? These research institutions, their information's out there. So it's very easy for them to, for instance, like you said, mount a very effective phishing campaign that gets them into the network. And the way that the darknet markets are, and any underground illicit market, not specific to darknet, the way they're architected now is it's very much a very high functioning economy, where if the threat actor who actually penetrates the network isn't in a position or doesn't have the total addressable market to sell what he or she has particularly gotten access to, they then sell the access to that network to someone who does. And so you'll see a lot of advertisements for, I have access to the following healthcare networks, and they'll give you examples and they'll give you a price, and you pay. Sometimes it's between 10 and 15,000 US dollars in Bitcoin to get access to that network. And then you execute your attack, which may be stealing those vaccines, or it might be, ransomware. It could be one of those things, right?
So are you seeing a lot of these cyber criminals actually be like nation state actors, or are they kind of, rogue actors who are kind of doing their own thing for profit?
Well, so yes.
Okay.
So the thing about the nation state actors is they're not going to advertise anything for sale. Right, they're bringing that in-house. I think that they're more so they're certainly mounting these attacks themselves, but they're also likely buyers of this access and or data that has been exfiltrated, which we've seen from myriad different healthcare institutions where people are purporting they have COVID vaccine data and or COVID vaccine formulas and or ways to test for the COVID infection and things like this that they've stolen from institutions. So I think it lowers the bar too for the buyer. So what I mean by that is, China or Russia or Iran or somebody like that would be very, very inexpensive for them to just buy all of those access, just in case. Even if some of them are BS, they'll buy them and then use that as a tool to get more access, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes total sense. So what about insider threats? I mean, are you seeing that as something that's becoming more prevalent on the black market? These folks who actually have access to the networks for these research institutes and pharmaceutical companies and such like that, who are, putting it up for sale on the dark net or dark web.
So, excuse me. Yes. Even before COVID, we saw an uptick in insider access sale, mostly for financial institutions, where on the dark net, where somebody said, "Hey, look, I am a loan, manager at this at a regional bank." They won't name the bank, and they'll say, "Hey, for this amount of money, I'll process a loan. It takes me 4 hours, and you'll get your money." And so they'll take a percent. So that type of scam and scheme has been going on for a while with insider access. We've seen some related to the healthcare institutions as well. And if you think about and we've seen an uptick, certainly since COVID, of both the financial and on the healthcare side of insider access type claims. The thing that you have to take into account also is for most of the educational institutions, a lot of these folks are not U.S. citizens, and they're not necessarily directly aligned with the U.S. government's interests, right? And so that adds a whole nother layer of complexity to the problem.
Okay. All right. So, so what do we do about this? I mean, is there like a technology perhaps that's out there that can kind of help government agencies and law enforcement organizations to kind of crack down on this, especially as it relates to COVID? Because that's, to your point, that the vaccine may be the most valuable thing in the world. So obviously we want to do all we can to, protect the interests of those who are developing the vaccine, and and make sure that we're all safe and we all have access. So what can we do to kind of make sure that happens? Is there anything we can do?
Yeah, certainly there are steps you can take to mitigate the risk. And part of that is visibility, which is one of the things our company does. Intelligence as a discipline exists so that we can like if you think of why a government uses intelligence, they use it to sort of inform them as to how to allocate their resources for their offensive and defensive budgets. And same thing for enterprise and same thing for healthcare. They need to know where those attacks are coming from, where those leaks are occurring. And the knowledge alone is valuable, but having some mitigation plan in place to especially when you're talking about insider threat, to stop that from happening is key. Access to that information. Unfortunately, for the nation state side, I mean, I think we really just need to bolster our security programs, because our standard security programs, defense in depth, and the latest tools, and making sure that we've got a good program in place to detect when those attacks are occurring, because those folks have unlimited resources, virtually unlimited resources. They're quite an adversary, and that's I believe that's probably going overlooked in the research and healthcare side of this equation.
So I imagine, at least on the end user side, also, just employ a healthy amount of common sense. If it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Yeah. I mean, the bulk of what we've seen in the darknet is scams. And one of the things that we do is we track threat actors and credibility and things like this. So we can typically tell who's telling the truth and who's not. And we can even engage sometimes and have conversations with these folks to determine how real what they're claiming is. And so the bulk of it, like 90+% is scams. And so, getting on the dark net and think you're going to buy whether it's a legitimate pill like hydroxychloroquine or a COVID vaccine, the likelihood of you actually being successful is pretty low. So not advised.
Okay. All right. Well, buyer beware then, right?
Yeah, right.
So, all right, great. Well, I guess any parting thoughts regarding this? I mean, are there any best practices or things that folks need to consider when we're talking about, just making sure that the networks are locked down and the information is secure?
Yeah, I think, the common sense stuff that you talked about, which is, the phishing scams, don't click on emails. Those are very well-known, disciplined things. Password policy is a very simple thing that anyone can do to mitigate. Password policy meaning having different passwords for different tools, not common passwords, but various characters. The typical stuff. Plus, anytime you can, two-factor authentication, of course. Those very basic discipline things will solve a lot of the security problems. But on top of that, be mindful of the fact that we're not in our offices. And one of the things I like to preach about a lot is operational security. So right now, while I'm talking to you, the person in the apartment next to me can probably hear what I'm saying, and they can hear that about your business, and they can hear that about what you do. And so just being aware of that as well.
All right. Well, Curtis, thank you so much for taking the time, walking me through this. It's a fascinating topic, and I'm sure it's one that we're going to be hearing a lot more about in the future. So thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Charlene.
Great. All right, everybody, please stay tuned. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stick around.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Hey everybody, it's Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at MediaOps again. And it is time now for our new segment on TechStrong TV that highlights some of the webinars that we have coming up. One of the many strengths I think that MediaOps has is the many webinars that we do produce each week. And I can tell you, as a frequent moderator for a lot of these webinars, we have got some great content coming up on webinars. So without further ado, I do want to highlight some of the ones that we have scheduled for the upcoming week. All three of these are going to be on devops.com, so you can always go look for them there. Just go to the devops.com/webinar section, look in the upcoming webinar section to find them there. You can get registered there and find out everything you need to know about these webinars. But the first one I wanted to highlight is actually happening Monday, June 22nd at 9 a.m. Eastern, so please set your alarm clocks for that one. It's titled Business Continuity with Microservices-Based Apps and DevOps, Learnings from 8x8's Experience. So they focused on or the webinar, I should say, focuses on how 8x8 actually moved its cloud-based SaaS application to the public cloud from a data center, and it used microservices and Kubernetes and a microservices-based architecture to actually make that happen. So to meet increased customer demand. So if you are looking to possibly shift your infrastructure to the cloud and you're wondering if Kubernetes and microservices can kind of help ease that transition, this is definitely a webinar you want to watch. Okay, our next webinar that we have coming up is Tuesday, June 23rd at 11 a.m. and that is Eastern. This one is actually kind of interesting. It's the State of Mainframe DevOps webinar. It's being hosted by Broadcom, and it really offers a deep dive into the state of DevOps on the mainframes, where we stand today, what we can expect, user adoption, all that good stuff. We also on the webinar will have Mary Johnston Turner, who is the Research Vice President for Cloud Management at IDC. And she is going to actually talk about a survey that IDC recently did on this very topic. So she's got lots of information to impart. Our final webinar for the week that I want to highlight today is another one based on a survey, and it's called The State of Open Source Security and DevSecOps Pipelines, I think it is. It's sponsored by Sneak. And this particular webinar is also happening Tuesday, June 23rd. It's happening at 1 p.m. Eastern. And Sneak is actually, for this one, teaming up with Docker. And they're going to talk about some of the recent findings in the State of Open Source Security Report 2020, which obviously includes a lot of takeaways for improving open source security throughout the entire delivery pipeline, and lots of useful information and educational experiences that both organizations have gone through in putting together this survey and dealing with their customers on this particular topic. So please, if you're interested in open source security, if you're interested in how it actually fits into the DevOps pipeline, another one worth attending, definitely. And that is it for the 3 webinars that I wanted to highlight today. Tune in on Monday, June 22nd, and we'll have more webinars that we're going to be highlighting for the week. So until then, stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, and we'll see you around. Thanks.
It's now time for the Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley. Mitchell, on this Monday, doesn't have a guest. He's going to just give us some quick commentary that I think you're going to enjoy, short and to the point. So let's get it over to Mitchell. Mitchell, take it away.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining me for Analyst Corner today. One of the things that we center our work around a lot at Accelerated Strategies is this concept of software delivery management. And that's important for several reasons. While the technology and how we create software through DevOps and other approaches is super important, ultimately what matters is getting software out the door into production in the cloud, wherever that is, on devices, mobile, etc., into consumers, customers, internal players, into the hands of people and the business processes that support those. So software delivery management is really about understanding how effective our organizations are at doing that, mean, we spend a lot of money on software creation, IT infrastructure, all kinds of things. We want to make sure, of course, that we're getting the expected value out of it. And we have visibility into that process, which is always one of the biggest challenges with software development. Am I going to get out what I expected to, or am I getting something different? And how will I know? So we have engaged and appreciate the folks that have filled out the survey for us very much. We've engaged in a research project, done a survey, collected a lot of data. We're doing some of the analysis now that I expect to be out sometime after 4th of July. Look for that. There'll be a report on software delivery management. Don't know exactly the title yet, but we'll provide not only a report, but also some really easily consumable, digestible pieces of information. Sharing knowledge, right? Knowledge wants to be free. That's our mantra. And so we'll be doing some podcasts, some videos, some interviews, some panel conversations, presentation at DevOps World 2020 in September, virtual event. A lot of forums that we're going to be discussing this. And why? Because it's important. It's important to make sure or understand what we have to do and what the state of things are to be able to really know whether we're effective at delivering software. And while this won't be the end-all, be-all to all reports or all research into this area, I think we'll find some very compelling and interesting ideas and suggestions, some telltale signs of what are the key attributes of organizations that do this well, maybe what you can do to help improve your process, your organization around being able to deliver the right software fast, not just fast software, excuse me. So look forward to that. We'll be sharing it here on TechStrong TV, also through the DevOps Chats podcast. We'll be on some other podcasts as well. Sanjeev Sharma, principal analyst with Accelerated Strategy, is the person who's leading this work. So you'll get a chance to hear him talk about it. He's got deep levels of knowledge and expertise in the area of software creation, working with all kinds of ranges of sizes of organizations from his time at IBM to other parts of his career. So I look forward to sharing that with you. Stay tuned. We'll be announcing what some of those timing and events and output will look like. I appreciate you staying tuned and kind of following along with us. And again, if you participated in the research, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Even if it's 10 minutes to fill out a survey, it's hugely valuable to us. And I know you have to stop and take time to do that kind of thing as opposed to another task or a conversation that you need to have. And we appreciate that. Have a good day. Thanks for joining us today.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
No problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place, you know?
Oh.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Alrighty, that's a wrap for this Monday. Hope you enjoyed TechStrong TV today. We'll be back live again tomorrow with another great show at 9:30 a.m. But until then, stay safe, stay well, stay strong. TechStrong. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.